I would like to welcome you to the January 5th organizational meeting of the Jefferson County Board of Education. Before we get started, of course, I have few remarks to make, very brief remarks. I'd like to start tonight with a quote from Maya Angelou that says, people may forget what you said or what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. As we enter into another board year after an extremely trying and difficult year, I would like to thank everyone for your commitment to the education and mental health of our students. While we have had some tough decisions to make during this pandemic, we responded in the best interest of our students, staff, families, and our community. At this time, I am pleased to have the Honorable Judge Denise Clayton to administer the oath of office to our board members, Dr. Chris Cobb, District 2, Board Member Joseph Marshall, District 4, and Board Member Sarah McIntosh, District 7. Judge Clayton, Denise Clayton, began serving as Chief Judge of the Kentucky Court of Appeals on June the 1st, 2018. After being elected to that position by her fellow Court of Appeals judges, the Chief Judge provides administrative oversight to the Court of Appeals and serves for a 4-year term. She has been Chief Judge Pro Tem since July 2016. Judge Denise Clayton became the first Black woman to serve on the Kentucky Court of Appeals in October 2007. She serves the 4th Appellate District, Division 2. I will now ask Judge Clayton to administer the oath of office, please. Judge Clayton.
And thank you. And again, thank you for inviting me. With the board members, Dr. Cobb, Ms. McIntosh, Mr. Marshall, if you would all three raise your right hands, and if you want the other hand, that's good too, actually. But I will read the entire oath, and at the end, I will ask you whether if you would swear or affirm to the allegiance to this oath. So are you prepared to take the constitutional oath of office?
Yes.
All right. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this Commonwealth and be faithful and true to the Commonwealth of Kentucky so long as I continue a citizen thereof, and that I will faithfully execute to the best of my ability the office of member of the Jefferson County Board of Education according to law. And I do further solemnly swear that since the adoption of the present Constitution, I, being a citizen of this state, have not fought a duel with deadly weapons within this state, nor out of it, nor have I sent or accepted a challenge to fight a duel with deadly weapons, nor have I acted as a second in carrying a challenge, nor aided or assisted any person thus offending. So help me God. Do you so swear or affirm?
I do so swear.
I do swear.
You. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Clayton.
Thank you. And not that your meeting won't be exciting, but I will leave you at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Clayton, for assisting us with the installation of our board members this evening. We appreciate you always, so thank you very much for your time this evening. At this point, we're going to give each board member a brief opportunity to make a statement for the newly elected board members, and I'm going to do it by district, starting with District 2. Dr. Chris Cobb, any comments that you would have to make this evening, sir?
I would just like to say a very heartfelt thank you to everyone who came out to vote for me and everyone who lent support to my campaign. I appreciate it very, very much, and thank you for entrusting me to represent you on the school board once again.
Okay, thank you. District 4, Board Member Joseph Marshall.
Thank you, Chair Porter. I ditto that statement for the voters that came out in District 4. Even though we were able to run unopposed on the ballot, it still means a lot to have the support of the community as we continue to work hard to make JCPS the place we know that it can be. I'm just excited to have 4 more years to continue the work that we have started since my appointment. We have a long way to go, but I'm very hopeful of the future. So thank you to everyone for their support. all the endorsements and everything, and to my family as well. This has been an interesting journey, but I do think that we'll look back on this current board and see the changes that we are making and look at this as one of the influential times ever in the history of JCPS. So thank you to everyone. I appreciate it. And to all those who are working hard within JCPS, thank you for your hard work as we continue to push for our students and what's in their best interest. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And from District 7, our newest board member Sarah McIntosh.
Thank you, Chair Porter. Again, echo the sentiments of the gentleman before me, thanking everyone who helped to organize my campaign, encourage me to run, gave me advice along the way. And I have to also say that to board members and Dr. Polio and many members of his staff that have reached out since the election results to help with the transition. Former member Chris Brady, if he's watching, if he hasn't run away too far yet, appreciate his guidance and words of wisdom, as well as I transition into this role that is so near and dear to my heart, because I have been in education for so long and been advocating for kids, and I just feel like this is just one more way that I can help build the schools in our community to help our students ensure their future and that they're able to follow their path to success, but also to help move our entire community forward and make it an even better community in which to live. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to some, and a special welcome to our newest board member, Sarah McIntosh. We look forward to working together. Moving on with the agenda, the next item on our agenda this evening is the organization of the board, the election of the chairperson. Starting this organizational meeting of the Board of Education of the Jefferson County is convened in accordance with KRS 160.160, which requires boards of education to elect a chairperson and a vice chairperson for terms fixed by the board. Board Policy 01.41 requires that this be done annually at the first regularly scheduled board meeting held in January. Therefore, the officers so elected shall serve one-year term or until their successors are elected and duly qualified. I will call for nominations from the board for chairperson to serve a one-year term. After all nominations for chairperson have been made, I will close the nominations. I will call for a vote on the candidate nominated. The votes will be taken in the order in which the candidates were nominated. At the conclusion of the voting, I will declare, assuming a candidate has a majority, the individual receiving the largest number of votes to be elected chairperson. The newly elected chairperson shall similarly conduct the election of the vice chairperson. At this time, is there a nomination for board chairperson?
I would like to nominate Chairwoman Porter for the role of chair.
Okay, Dr. Schul, thank you. Are there other nominations for chair for the board? Hearing none, I think that at this point we will call for the vote.
Well, I'd like to second the nomination.
I'm sorry, Mr. Duncan, seconded by Board Member Duncan. My fault, thank you.
That's all right.
I'm reading from my script, so I should have done my homework a little earlier. Thank you. At this time, we've had a motion and a second for the nomination for board chair, Diane Porter. The nominations are now closed, and I will call for a vote on the candidate that has been nominated. All in favor of Board Member Diane Porter being elected as chairperson to serve as a one-year term. We'll start with during the roll call to get the vote, please, starting with Board Member Sarah McIntosh.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Board Member Duncan.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Craig.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Board Member Cobb, Dr. Chris.
Yes.
Kevin, am I supposed to vote for myself or just close it now? I don't vote for myself, right?
Can.
I'm sorry. No.
Or you can abstain. It's up to you.
Okay. So at this time we have we have 6 votes yes, and I will just say present for my vote. So at this time, the board chairperson has been elected to serve for 2021. That person being Diane Porter. Thank you for that. And so now we have to move on to the conduct the election for the vice chairperson of the board. Is there a nomination for the vice chair of the board?
I'll nominate Dr. Kolb.
Okay. Dr. Chris Cobb. Okay. By Board Member Craig. And is there any other nomination? And is there a second to the nomination for the vice chair of the board?
I'll second the nomination.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Marshall.
And Chair Porter, your script, I did some brushing up on my Roberts rules today as well. A second's not required, but it is permitted, and it's viewed as an affirmation or an endorsement. So,
okay. All right, well, thank you. So now those nominations are closed for the vice chair of the board. And at this time, I will call for the vote for board member Dr. Chris Cobb to be elected as the vice chairperson to serve a 1-year term, starting with board member McIntosh.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Board member Duncan.
Yes.
Thank you. Board member Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Board member Craig.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Dr. Chris.
Yeah, I'm not as humble as you are, so I will vote for myself.
Okie dokie. Diane Porter, yes, so it's unanimous. Board member Dr. Chris Kolb will become our vice chair for the year 2021. Thank you so much for the vote, everyone. And before we move on to the minutes, a couple of things I wanted to say to honor our board this evening. If I can find the right piece of paper. Just a second, please. First of all, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to serve as the chair for 2021. It's an honor, and I appreciate your support and look forward to the work. I would like to acknowledge that January is School Board Member Recognition Month. Each board member brings a unique set of skills, knowledge, and competencies to this board. I hope you will be able to use your skills, knowledge, and competencies in your board role. Andrew Carnegie states that teamwork is the ability to work together toward a common vision, the ability to direct individual accomplishments toward organizational objectives, and teamwork allows people to attain amazing results. Very quickly tonight, as we start a new team, this is 2021, we have a new team. So I would like for each board member to think of one word that describes your purpose or your reason or why you show up to be a member of the Jefferson County Board of Education. Only one word, and it has to be either the first letter of your first name or the first letter of your last name. No prepping before the fact, but I'll do it first so you can, everybody's cringing in their chair. This is really easy. For example, my first name is Diane, so the letter D, I would say dedicated to the work. And if I were to use my last name, the P for Porter, I would say I was passionate about children. So you can either do the first or last. And I know you're looking at me like, why is she doing that? It's all about us building a new team. It's a new year, so we're building a new team. So just to put people on the spot, sorry to do that. I'm going to start with Dr. Chris first, please.
I feel like I kind of have an easy one because my last name starts with K, so I'll just say kids.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Craig.
C, we'll go for confidence in our future.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Marshall.
I'll go with my first name and I'll just say justice.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Duncan.
D, I'm going to use D. Determination.
Okay, good. And Dr. Schul.
I'm going to go with S for supporting our children.
Okay, thank you. And Board Member McIntosh.
I'll use the S and student success.
Okay, thank you. That was really easy. Thank you so much. And we're going to move on now to, and Dr. Polio, don't be mad at me. I'm not even looking at you. I know I'm not supposed to talk this much, but it's the new year and the new board. So I'm moving as quickly as I can, but it's very important that we acknowledge the work of our board this evening and for the year to come. So thank you, board members, for participating in that last minute little quiz that we just did. So moving on, we would like to move on to, let's see, the next thing on our agenda is the approval of the minutes of our previous meeting. Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes of the December 1st and December 15th meeting?
Marshall. And Marshall seconds.
Okay, board member Craig and Marshall seconds, if I heard that correctly. So I'll call for the vote quickly. Dr. Chris.
Yes.
Thank you. Board member Craig.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Board member Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Board member Duncan.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Board member McIntosh.
Yes.
Thank you. And Diane Porter, yes. So it was unanimous. Thank you very much. We will now move on to the information items. And at this point, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Polio as we talk about the acceptance of an update on district response to COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Polio.
Thank you, Chair Porter. And I'll start with my P in my name. I was going to do Dr. Cobb's ponytail, but instead I will do passionate. I am passionate for JCPS and for our kids there, but I couldn't let that go past. So it's too
I just had to make Kevin jealous of all my hair.
too magnificent to let that pass.
Fantastic.
But I also want to take the time to, as we begin this, first of all, congratulate those that were sworn in today. Congratulations to our new board member, Ms. McIntosh. Congratulations. And it's a pleasure to have you on the board. Enjoyed conversations already. I know we'll have many more. And to Dr. Cobb for being reelected as well. Congratulations. And Mr. Marshall, congratulations. You have set the record for the most elections by a board member in a 24-month period. So congratulations. And also congratulations to our chair and vice chair for another year. I do believe during crisis, it brings teams together. And I believe our board is at a place, an 8-person team that we 7 board members and the superintendent and the administration have pulled together through this difficult time very well. So I'm excited to continue to work with Chair Porter and Vice Chair Kolb. So congratulations to all. Looking forward to 2021. And as we talk about the beginning of 2021, I'm excited to be able to bring you this report. I do believe this is the first time since we've talked about COVID that we truly see a light at the end of the tunnel. We don't know exactly when that light is right now, but I do believe that we see an end and that we will be coming back to school sooner rather than later. And we know that this has been a very challenging and difficult time. This has been the toughest and most difficult leadership issue that I've had to wrestle with in a 25-year career. And that we continue to wrestle with every single day and struggle with. There are many things that frustrate all of us, and I've talked about those before, so I won't rehash those, but we all know the differing opinions about where it is spreadable and where it is not spreadable, and who gets it and who doesn't get it, and things that we have heard that It does not pass in school. And even though we found out this week, unfortunately, that a teacher passed away in a Kentucky school district, you know, and how difficult that must be. And it has hit us here close at JCPS as well. And so just working through all of these challenges while also knowing that we want our kids to be back in person, to be in school, to get the services that they need and everything that JCPS provides to our kids has been such a difficult time doing this and going through this. And it's a struggle every single day. And we've been talking in the past week that we are so pleased to see an end to this so that we can move forward with getting kids back and recovering, supporting our kids for as many school days as possible. And so tonight, we're going to, if it's okay with Chair Porter, I'm going to divide this into, although it's one information item, I'm going to divide it into two different areas, so to speak. So the first one would be the data on COVID-19 and the vaccine, along with a quick update on the new CARES funding package, what we know at this time. Pause and take questions and comments at that time, and then we will circle back after that to do athletics, the winter athletics conversation, and then have questions and comments about that afterwards so that we can kind of separate them into two. I assume that's okay with you, Chair Porter? You can go thumbs up.
I'm sorry. It's fine. I was muted. I apologize.
Great. I figured so. I just wanted to, so that we could discuss that. And so once again, I just wanted to talk about the guiding principles. You've seen this from the very beginning. And I want to once again commend this board that we have stuck to the principles, the guiding principles that we established at the very beginning of this pandemic when we talked about returning to school, and followed the guidance of the state health department, Dr. Stack, and our local health department. And I think that has been critical as we've moved forward, is following the guidelines that we are given by the state experts. So we know health and safety is number one, but high quality instruction is right behind that. And so we know we want to get our kids back in school as quickly as we possibly can, and we are committed to doing that. We know we have to have flexibility. We've had so much flexibility during this time. And we are giving, our schools are prepared to return, but they know they're going to have to be flexible in this part of it as well, because what we present you tonight, we have a lot of information, but we still have a lot of we're not sure. We don't know yet right now. For instance, we don't know how many of the vaccinations we are going to get in 3 to 4 weeks, and how many of the grade levels we will be able to essentially clear or allow them to have that vaccine so that we could open up. And I'll talk about that when we get to that. But we know we're going to have to be flexible as we do that. Also, equity is critical for us, ensuring equity and accurate and timely communication with families and our staff, and then community trust. And these have all been very difficult at times, but we have continued to work hard and stay steadfast to these principles from the very beginning. So as you see, this is the data as of January 4th. So yesterday afternoon, the state data. Checked before we came down. I believe we were right at about 55 cases per 100,000 in Jefferson County. I believe that was this afternoon, my most recent check, and I usually check 2 to 3 times a day to see where we are on the data and in line with our current status with the state health department. So now I wanted to get into vaccines, because as I said, this is giving us a lot of hope. As their videos show, it's a shot of hope for the vaccinations. It's already started. As I'll show you how many of Kentuckians have gotten the vaccine at this point, but we watched today to get that update from the Kentucky Department for Public Health. But we know this is the hope that we need to move forward. And so vaccines, as you can see, the number of vaccine doses that received in Kentucky, this was as of yesterday afternoon. And you could see 122 had arrived, 122,000, and right at 50,000 had been administered. As of this afternoon, the governor reported 66,000 vaccines had been administered. So you can see that's picking up by the day. My guess is by the end of today, actually, and once we're reported, we're well over 70,000 vaccines that have been administered statewide. So we know that's picking up. We also know that here in Jefferson County, yesterday, we opened up at Broadbent Arena the mass vaccination site. And that is what Jefferson County Public Schools K-12 will be using in collaboration with our local health department. And so we know that they have built a very good system there that we will be using very shortly. So we're excited about that. This is straight from the governor's press releases of 12/28/2020. And he showed this once again today. I think he pretty much shows it every day. But they are right now working through that phase 1A, which, as you know, is long-term care facility residents and workers, assisted living facility residents and staff, and healthcare personnel in clinical settings. So that is the 70,000 that you see in 1A. I know 1A is not complete yet. They continue to push hard to get through 1A, and I know the governor has discussed greatly his desire to speed up this process. But in phase 1B, this is where we come in, and this is really, they have not said in any particular order in 1B, and so these could all be on the same line, but what it is persons 70 or older, our first responders, and our K through 12 school personnel. And as I did last time, I want to commend our state health department and Governor Beshear for putting K through 12 school personnel high on the list in this phase 1B and being committed to getting us back in school. And this is what this will do. So we are excited that we are, that school personnel are in phase 1B. And this came from the governor on 12/28, but he reiterated it today once again. So I just want to highlight this quote because we will talk about timing tonight. So depending on the vaccine distribution schedule, phase 1B could begin as early as February 1st or plus or minus a week. And it's almost exactly what he said today. So he said he would like to see us start on January 25th. So that would be the ideal situation, would be to start on January 25th. So we are pushing and hoping that that date comes to fruition because we do know that it will be the Moderna vaccination. Now that we know that, obviously we would love to have had the one that was only 21 days, as I had talked about earlier in December with a February 15th possibility. But if we could get that January 25th, we would have a 28-day second booster. That would be the second booster. So that would be at our earliest date that we could begin based on the vaccine if the data does not support a return prior to that. And you can do the math on that as when we could potentially have a back to school. So what we did is directed by the state, as we told you last time, we got this guidance right before our last December board meeting. I believe it was December 15th. We got it right before coming into the board meeting, and we responded by making sure that we implemented this survey. We surveyed our entire faculty and staff. We received 14,784 responses. 12,884 indicated that they would like a vaccine reserved for them, which is about 87%, said that they would like that vaccine reserved. I would like to reiterate once again that staff does have those 12,884 still have the opportunity to opt out if they choose to. But those 12,884 have reserved that vaccination. We had 1,900 who declined, meaning there will not be a vaccination for those 1,900. And then we had employees who did not complete the survey, and they are counted as declining the survey. So as you can see, our request to the state for our employees was 12,884. I believe we had approximately 900 or so additional contractors, such as student teachers, and services that are provided to students from outside organizations that we also requested the vaccination. And that is included in what we sent to the state on December 30th. But for JCPS employees, we have reserved 12,884 vaccines. And so I wanted to go and spend a little more time talking about the numbers by grade, because I think that is critical to talk about. It is something we want your input on as we finalize this. When we won't be able to finalize exactly how many until we find out how many of the vaccinations we are receiving from the state. And we hope to find that soon. And I know they're waiting for some information from the vaccine providers and the federal government as well. But as soon as we get that, we will be able to implement this plan. So you will see by grade level, we ask staff, do they want a vaccine reserved for them, yes or no? And what is the lowest grade level served by that employee? And so a bus driver, for instance, who has multiple runs, including early childhood, would check early childhood being the youngest served, or it could be kindergarten, even though they might serve K through 12. But we have to have those employees vaccinated in order to return. So you will see a much larger request from staff members for K, 6th, and 9th grade, because it includes all of those staff, which includes bus drivers, nutrition service team, principals, school secretaries, instructional assistants, etc. So for us to open for kindergarten, it takes most of the elementary school staff to be vaccinated to do that. Then you will see much larger in 6th grade, because it takes most of the the middle school staff to operate 6th, 7th, and 8th, and much smaller in 7th and 8th, and at the same in high school. So you will see those numbers in much larger, and I'll talk about those in just a second as well. And then I told you about the contractors serving students were also served. So as we look at these specific vaccine requests by grade, it's important to know, just like I said, the total is 12,884. The ones that will be at the back end of this right now, a little over 1,000, we know will be central office workers who do not work with children and adult education. So that will come at the back end of the vaccination, because we want to make sure we get pre-K through 12 first. Obviously, pre-K is something we will have to make a decision on. That would require 515 vaccinations. So as we have discussed this with you and others, obviously we want to begin with our primary grades first. We know we want to get our youngest students back in the building first. In order to bring back kindergarten students, the requested vaccinations is 4,427. Then you can see an additional to first grade would be 479, second grade 346. I won't read them all to you. Third grade 352. So what we will be looking for is the number of vaccinations that we will be receiving either at the end of January or the 1st of February. We are hoping that is that January 25th date, that we can implement that as quickly as possible. But for example, if we got 5,600 vaccinations, we know 5,600 is K through 3. If we added in pre-K, that's another 515. So we are looking at about 6,100 vaccinations for pre-K through 3rd grade. If you add in 4th and 5th grade, you're up to about 6,225 vaccinations. And with pre-K now, it's about 6,750. So we know if we got word from the state that we were getting about 7,000 vaccines, 7,000 doses, that we could then implement K through 5 vaccinations first. Get all of our K through 5s done that last week of January, the first week of February, 28 days later, repeat the process. And that would be our first group that we would target for opening up our schools. In the meantime, we would be hoping we would getting more of the first vaccination as well. But if we were to get more, so for instance, for us to open up K through 8, if we get approximately 8,650 vaccinations, then we could target our K through 8 staff and personnel. And so we know that once we hear, if it were to be about 9,000 total doses, we could say we could do pre-K through 8th grade to open up, or to vaccinate first, I should say. And then finally, you can see the numbers. If we get about 11,500. And really, it's about 11,800. If we were to get that amount of doses, then we could vaccinate pre-K through 12. Our plan will be dependent upon the number of doses we receive here in approximately 3 weeks. And once we do that, we will be able to present to you exactly the dates that we will be rolling this out. 28 days later will be the second dose of the Moderna vaccination. And then, yes, we will be doing things, obviously, like allowing setup days for teachers. We also want to make sure that schools are ready, but we want to implement our opening of school process as quickly as possible once we get past that second vaccination, so that we can, whatever number that is that we get from the state, we will then be able to roll out that plan of what we will be doing. And so the vaccine rollout, as I said, we're planning with the health department for drive-through vaccinations. So right now that is up and running at Broadbent. Some of the information that we know, it takes about 15 minutes to go through this for a person to go through that vaccination. They actually pull their car into Broadbent Arena, answer some questions that are provided by the health department workers. They get the vaccination while sitting in their car. Then they pull out to the parking lot and wait about 15 minutes, 30 minutes for some, to make sure that there is no reaction to the vaccination, and then they leave. So you're talking about total time for employees, about 45 minutes for the process to go through that. We are working on some options for staff members who do not have transportation so that we can provide those and make sure that we get all of our employees through this. Obviously, you know, the big date will be when we receive that first shipment of the vaccine. And we can get that and move that as quickly as possible to begin that. And we will begin holding that drive-through event for the first set of employees. As I said, and you will see on this, we are proposing that our lower grade staff serving our lowest grades go first so we can get those students back in school as quickly as possible. Ideally, we would get that 11,876 doses of the vaccine, so we could say that K through 12 is all on the same schedule and that we're opening up at the same time. We know now that since we built this, that it looks like it's going to be the Moderna vaccination, which is a 28-day booster. So it will not be the 21-day, so it will be that 28-day. So you could see if we were to be lucky enough to get that last week in January, that booster would come about the last week in February. And that it gives a little bit of the time frame of what we would be able to do. But once again, it will all depend upon when we receive that and when the health department is able to first get those vaccines into our employees' arms. And obviously, if it's not the 11,800, if it is 5,000 is our first dose or amount of doses, then we will go with our primary grades and we will repeat the cycles as quickly as we can as the vaccines come to us. And as I said, we will begin with staff who work with primary students and then build from there and propose our grade level order in order to get our youngest students back first and then build to our high school students after that. And so I do want to say once again, I've had questions about this. The vaccine is not approved at this time for students. So that is not an option for us to provide it to students. And therefore, as you know, we will continue to provide a virtual option or an in-person option for all families for the remainder of the 2020-2021 school year. We can make a determination, obviously, on 21-22 at a later date, whether we will keep that virtual option. There will be some other ways we are looking at doing that. I do not believe NTI will necessarily be an improved option for next school year, but obviously we will have to see where we are on vaccinations of children at this time. If that does happen and we need to provide it, we will provide it. But we know the form is on the JCPS website and 87% of our families have already responded to that. We have a public dashboard that shows what that is. 59% selected in-person learning, 41% selected virtual learning. That was prior to the vaccination information. And so we are communicating with families now They have the opportunity, we're not going to start over, but they have the opportunity to go in and change their selection if they choose to do that. So we will continue to communicate with families. We may have more that will want in-person learning. But at this point, we know close to 40,000 families are still selecting that virtual learning, and we will continue to provide that option for our families. Communication is going to continuously be sent. At a certain point, we will have to have a deadline that we will say we need your final choice in by a certain date. But we are expecting it to be somewhere in the range of that 60-40% of in-person and virtual learning, which greatly helps us with social distancing in our school once we return to in-person learning. And so as we look at this, I wanted to give the most up-to-date COVID-19 mode of instruction metrics for K through 12 education. So you can see we are going to continue to evaluate these metrics on a daily basis. As I told you, right now, we're in the mid-50s per 100,000. When we first started talking about this, it was about 14 or 15 per 100,000. The positivity rate is 11% at this point statewide. And there is some discussion that could be because of the holidays, which may be true. But right now, we are at 11% when it comes to the statewide positivity rate. So we will continue to monitor this. I do want to say, as the red, we have been, the more aggressive hybrid is the terminology that is now allowed, and to consider remote learning, which we have done up until this point being very much in the red. So we will continue to evaluate this. Obviously, we are building that return to school plan based upon the vaccination schedule. Our goal will be to bring you a recommendation once we implement the vaccination schedule to open in-person school as quickly as possible after that. But once again, that will be your call, as you know. But we continue to evaluate it. If we see a decline, we could bring that back to you. We are also working very intently, if we have to bring our younger students back first, to also looking to middle and high school to bringing small groups of students in while we're going through the vaccination process to support our high need students, whether that be special education, whether that be interventions for students, or whether career and technical education. We are looking at some opportunities to do that. So we are prepared if there is a gap in time between the time that elementary primary students get it and our secondary faculty, get that vaccination. So we are looking at that right now and plan on bringing you a plan in the very near future as we roll out the vaccination plan. But there is no doubt, I just want to say this again, there is no doubt that our goal will be, once implemented the vaccination schedule, our goal will be to bring you a recommendation to open up in-person school as quickly as possible. We want to be efficient. We want it to be effective and safe. So we will always go with that guiding principle, but that will be our goal, is to bring you that recommendation as soon as we are able to implement the vaccination schedule. But as you know, once again, that will be your call, and we will have discussions about that as we move forward. And so finally, before we stop and kind of cover that and take questions and comments about that, we were thankful to see Congress pass emergency COVID relief bill for elementary and secondary education in mid-December, and then the president signed it, I believe, at the end of the month. So it did become law, and so we should be getting additional funds from this. And I want to turn it over to Cordelia Harden for a couple of minutes to discuss what we don't know all of the details at this point, but some of the things that we do know that will be coming to us as a result of this bill. Cordelia?
Thank you. We know the total education recovery that was included in this bill was approximately $82 billion. $22 billion went to higher ed, $54 billion to the K-12. The portion that we will get will depend upon, of course, what the state receives, but it is based on our allocation for our Title I. So previously, we receive about 17% of what the state receives, but until we have those details, we really don't know how much we will receive. There is no portion of that $54 billion is not set up for non-public schools, where in our previous CARES, we had to allocate, as you know, a portion to non-public schools. But what they did include at the federal government level was $2.75 billion directly for non-public schools, but that's included in the governor's emergency education relief fund of the total 4.1. As of right now, the way it reads, we will probably be having to also administer that as we do with the CARES non-public, but the state could also contract with a firm to handle that. But we really, because of Munis and the reporting, we expect that we'll probably be managing that as we do with the CARES non-public. Nutrition service is experiencing deficits and across the whole nation. So what they have done is looked at what we would have received in half of March of 2020 plus April, May, June, and they're saying 50% of those net revenue loss. Then there's a possibility of us receiving some additional funding there. It was approximately one.
Would you pause right there?
Sure.
Just a second. I just want to reiterate this point and get, I want us to all understand where that loss has come from. So traditionally, the way we get funded for nutrition services is by the amount of meals that are served. So clearly we serve many more meals when we have 97,000 students at school every day than those that are just picking them up at school. We were anticipating an $18 million shortfall that would have to be picked up by our general fund for lost revenue from nutrition services. And this is every district around the country. This is not just JCPS, but $18 million in lost revenue there alone. So I do want to clarify, when I hear from people that say, you know, our lights aren't on or our buses aren't running, just in nutrition services alone, we were losing $18 million. And that's why this CARES Act was so important to our students. Now, I believe that's just 55% coverage of the lost revenue. But I just wanted to highlight that specifically and be clear about where that loss is coming from. It's not based on anything else other than the fact that we just don't have enough kids right now, 96,000 kids picking up meals every day. Cordelia, clarify that if I misspoke on anything, please.
No, that is absolutely correct. Matter of fact, last year, FY20, there was a $3 million deficit that our own nutrition service was not able to pay their bills. So the general fund had to take care of that. So this 18 million is what we have estimated will be the deficit for this year. The 10 billion that's been set aside for childcare, we're not sure that we will receive any of that. If we do receive some, it would be a small amount through the TAP program. But at this point, I have no idea if we're going to receive it or not. There's not enough details within the bill that I can see whether we'll receive anything. The internet service.
Real quick, Cordelia, and I just want to reiterate this once again. $250 million to Head Start, which we do not have. As you well know, that's a $15 million hit to us. And our general fund every year to pick up the seats, and we're proud to do it. I know we're all committed to it, but it's $15 million a year right now that we continue to fund. So those $250 million that were earmarked for Head Start will go to other communities that have a robust Head Start and not Jefferson County. And we will continue to provide those seats out of our general fund when other cities are getting this funding.
Correct. On the internet service, we will not receive anything from this, but what it does, it provides to the internet provider the opportunity for them to discount some of their charges to low-income families. So my hope is what it will result in is maybe more connectivity for our families, which will in turn, of course, help our students. So we don't know what impact it will have, but I think there could be some impact there. Unemployment benefits have been extended 11 weeks. We are self-insured on unemployment benefits. Right now, the governor has used some of his federal funds that have been allocated to the state to help offset those extended benefits. So we're hoping that there is not an additional cost to us other than what we already prepare for. But we won't know that again until this 11 weeks is over. But where we are at this point with unemployment benefits, it looks like with the governor's assistance into the state unemployment fund by providing funding from his federal dollars that he's received, then districts, it appears, are not going to have to shore up the account. And that's basically my report.
And so I will finish by saying this. First of all, it will be critical that any funding that we get from this is not used for recurring costs, meaning this is one-time funding. And so, for instance, if you hire positions for this and you're using funding for that, after this is done, you would be picking it up out of the general fund. Our plan will be to bring to you a clear plan using these funds to support additional learning and opportunities for students once we come back. So more robust summer opportunities for kids, after school, continued support of our hubs. But we're going to have to really target this funding for that support of our students. And so that's what we're looking at, to really be targeting those kids that we know have lost the most during this time. And we will bring you that specific plan. But I do want to, as we talk about budget coming up, this does not necessarily bridge our budget issue, which I just defined for you a little bit, which was 18 million for nutrition services, 15 million a year for Head Start. Loss of occupational revenue put us 25 million, we know, in the red last year. So this will support our students, but we are going to have a tough budget cycle ahead that we're going to have to make difficult decisions so that we move past being in that red and get to where we balance it. Because as you know, with our additional revenue and funding, which may come next fall, that will be for the earmarked for the specific resolution that you all passed in October. So that sums that up. So I believe that gets us to the end. We'll hold on athletics, Chair Porter. So as you can see, there's a lot of still moving parts. We get information on a daily basis. And so we will continue to supply that. And I know by the time we gather together again officially on the 19th, we will have much more information for you about the schedule and vaccinations and when we will be able to implement this, and probably much more on the stimulus package as well. But we will stop at this point and take any questions or comments that you have.
Okay, we'll start with questions from the board. If you have a question, please let me see your hand or speak loudly. Ms. Duncan, I see your hand. So we'll go with Ms. Duncan first.
All right. I just want to ask a few things here. After the booster shot, then is there an additional 14 days before we begin bringing kids back so that we have that chance for that to be effective?
I will let, I do not believe that requires a 14-day waiting period after the booster shot. So Eva, unless I'm incorrect about that, I do not think that requires 14 days.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask about a question that's been asked me. If people have chosen to teach through the virtual option and the vaccinations do happen, are they being required to come back into the buildings and do virtual academy? And if so, how does that benefit them if they needed that virtual option to be away from exposure? And how, if you bring them back in the buildings, how does that help them? That's a question I've been asked.
So obviously that's one of the reasons we encouraged everyone to reserve the vaccination. However, I will say this, we are going to follow FDA guidelines on this, the CDC guidelines and our state health department. And it is not for those who request the virtual academy. It will be those who get approved accommodations. The approved accommodations, we believe, will be much more stringent than they were in the fall. So where we had 2,000 teachers receiving accommodations, I do not believe it will be that number. But obviously, this is not our decision. We're going to follow guidelines that are provided to that. Kevin, is anything you want to add to that?
That's correct. And you got to do some mental gymnastics when you layer in the governor's executive order that talks about some accommodations for employees. Then you layer that in with the Americans with Disabilities Act. I've been trying to come up with a chart, but I think my chart makes it more complicated. Dr. Polio summed it up well. I'll just add to it, though, because I know this is of interest. If we go back to in-person when we are in the orange or red, and this is according to the governor's executive order, we will be, and we're required to offer an accommodation to high-risk employees who request alternative or a virtual work assignment. It could be also an alternative assignment that maybe puts them in person, but maybe at a different location. And then there's a list of 9 or 10 categories, for example, chronic kidney disease, diabetes, et cetera. That's outlined in the governor's executive order. That requirement goes down until 7 days after the final dose of the vaccine, and then all employees can come back unless the employee did not get a vaccine because the FDA or the CDC recommended that person not get a vaccine, meaning that persons with specific conditions. Those haven't been listed yet. Then we go back up to that accommodation piece if they request it. And then the second category of people would then be, assuming we're back in person, those employees that refuse to take the vaccine for whatever reason, but they're not on the CDC. They don't have a condition under FDA or CDC that says they shouldn't take the vaccine. We still would engage in the what's called the interactive process under the American with Disability Act to see if there's an accommodation that could meet their stated need. But then you get into whether or not that creates an undue hardship on the employer. Those are things we deal with every day in a normal time, that accommodation process. But for example, we would still go through that process with those employees if they request it.
And just to follow up on that, I just want to, say once again that, we want to support our employees clearly. That's why obviously we've encouraged the vaccination and reservation of that. We've been pleased to see that most groups are approved for the vaccination. Most of the high-risk groups at this point have been approved for the vaccination. So that's a real positive for us. But we also have to know that having 2,000 teachers and 3,000 employees not in a building becomes very difficult to operate school in a safe and effective manner with that number out. So we keep that in continue to work through that. I will add, I've been told, Ms. Duncan, the state health department recommends 7 days after the booster, the second vaccination.
Okay, very good. And a question about the substitutes. Are they included in that 12,000 that have requested vaccines?
Yes, they are, and we put them in the lowest they serve. So if it's a sub that was elementary, we put them as K. If there's just someone who maybe did high school, then we put them with ninth. But yes, they are included. Okay,
and I've also had a question about our bus drivers. If we have adequate numbers of bus drivers, because we're going to have probably close to the same number of buses in order to socially distance kids. Or do separate runs. But do we feel right now, if we have 4 weeks now, do we think, or 4 or 5 weeks or 6 weeks, do we think in that time period we have adequate numbers of bus drivers who will have been vaccinated and ready to go?
Well, I'll say this, that ever since before I took this job, we've been short on bus drivers, and we continue to be short on bus drivers. There is no doubt about that at all. And the pandemic only obviously made that much more difficult. So I'm not going to say that we have the bus drivers that we need to have, to fill every single position that we have. But I do believe that I'm confident that we will have the bus drivers we need to meet the needs of getting our kids to school safely and effectively. Chris, anything you want to add to that?
No, I would echo the same thing, Dr. Polio. I mean, we'll get kids to school. Social distancing on a bus that's not been a consideration that we've been able to entertain, honestly, based on the number of students and number of buses we have. But we're going to make sure the bus routes are covered and make adjustments accordingly.
Okay. I just have one more question about the infection rate. If we look at this infection rate, and everybody, the teachers and staff have all been vaccinated, and we look at a rising community infection rate even then, will that have an impact on our thinking about coming back to school?
Well, I think, yes, we have to weigh all of these options as we go forward. And I think we would depend clearly on the governor and the state health department's guidelines on that if there was an escalating occurrence within the state or the community. So, I think we always have to be flexible with that and plan for that. So I'm not, clearly we have to keep that in mind, but our number one goal here is to get through this vaccination. Hopefully we haven't seen a spread and we get our kids back in school.
All righty. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. Next board member that has questions. I cannot see the screen.
I do, Chair Porter.
Okay. Board Member Marshall, thank you.
No, thank you, Chair. Quick question, Dr. Polio. I know based on those current survey results, you're potentially right now looking at about 60% of families saying they would return in person. How confident are we to deal with maybe some disparities that may come up when we have certain schools that obviously are going to have more kids try to come back in person versus other, schools may have less in person and more virtual? So what's kind of our plan for dealing with those disparities that might rise up between schools?
So, we've been dealing with that since really September, is dealing with the differentiation. What that would really come down to is the potential of having to move some staff or cover some staff in some other areas. So we are prepared to do that if we needed to do that, to cover classes, if more are in a virtual academy. And we had to have a teacher, have them another school, possibly cover students in a virtual academy. We've planned for that. So we believe we can do it. There is no doubt that we are seeing a difference in family selection based on race as well. I think we are seeing our Black and brown students are much more fearful right now of returning to in-person school, and very understandably, because it is impacting communities at higher rates. So that is something we have to keep in mind. But I do believe, Mr. Marshall, that we have plans in place to address those issues as they come up in schools.
Okay. And so with the implementation of vaccination, are we throwing out the option of, putting a cap on how much in person, or is it, we'll take what we get and run with it?
Could you rephrase that? I'm sorry, I don't follow you there.
So I guess what I'm saying is, if we have a certain school that ends up with, hypothetically, 65% of their students wanting to come back in person, And, we may not feel like that building is able to, even with vaccination. I mean, there's still going to have to be some social distancing and some changing of movement throughout the building. So have we thought about, putting a cap on no more than 50% coming back in person, or have vaccinations just basically, allowed us to say, we take everybody if they wanted to all come back into a school building?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say this. Every school has, for several months, had their numbers in that 60-40 range of who's returning and who is going to be virtual. And with the numbers we have at this point, we are confident that schools will be able to, each individual school will be able to meet the needs of that school. Now, that was based on the hybrid model. And that is a decision that we, as of now, following the state guidelines, we would have to do a hybrid model for middle and high because of the large amount of students that we have. So you would really be taking no more than 30% in many cases, 60, 70% chose in person divided by 2 on a hybrid model. Now, I'm going to say this, that I would much rather us be in a 5-day-a-week model. I believe we are starting to see some evidence that says the hybrid model of 2 days a week and then 3 days in asynchronous instruction may actually have more of a negative impact because attendance is low, and schools are spending a great deal of time social distancing. So those 2 days that students are in school may end up only being 1.25 or 1.5 of actual learning. And then the other days are all asynchronous, which means they are working without teacher guidance. So I would much rather bring you the model of 5-day-a-week in both middle and high and elementary once we get the vaccination. That will require some change, though, to the guidance we are given by the state. But if that doesn't happen, we will be prepared to bring you the necessary hybrid model to ensure that no student, no school is above what their capacity can handle.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Chair Porter.
Thank you. Next board member with questions?
I had some questions, Chair Porter.
Okay, Dr. Chris.
And I apologize if any of this information has been previously given and I just don't remember. I find it more and more difficult to hold all the factors and facts on my head at one time. So and tell me if anything I'm saying is mistaken, obviously. We cannot require people to get the vaccine, correct, as a condition of coming back to in-person, like if they're an employee, coming back to teach in person. Is that true?
That's correct.
So what, the situation, one of the situations that that worries me a little is, if we're at a school, do we have a certain base? Have we thought about, or is it even possible to have a certain baseline number of percentage of faculty in the school that, have to be vaccinated in order for us to feel safe opening that school? I don't know. Was it about what percentage of our employees was it, Dr. Polio, that indicated they were planning to get the vaccine?
Well, 87% of those that completed the survey. Now we have some who didn't complete it, and those cover a lot of different employees, like substitute teachers. So, for instance, a large pool of substitute teachers who may not even be planning to be a part of it, may not have completed the survey. So I don't have specifically what that percentage of active employees, but I'm sure we could get that for you.
Well, I mean, that's good enough, I think. I mean, it seems like it's going to be fairly high. So that's good. But even then, the vaccine's highly effective, but I think it's around 95% or so. So, that's 1 out of 20 that you're talking about. It's not going to be super effective. So, is there a way, have we thought about, or is it possible to have people that don't get the vaccine to not work in person, like to continue to do online instruction for the percentage of kids that are remaining in remote instruction?
I think that's a discussion we can have. I think it's going to be very challenging. And the challenging part of that is that we had some schools that may have had 35 or 40 apply for accommodations, a high school, and some may have had 4 or 5 apply for accommodations. And so, that's why we have legally followed what the KDE has given us and what the CDC has said about following the guidelines that they provide about who should receive accommodations. Kevin, is that anything you want to add to that?
Agree, but once we get past the individuals that have a actual medical reason from CDC or FDA not to take the vaccine, and they're just voluntarily not taking it they may have other reasons, but they're not covered under CDC or would go on in, if they're asking for that type of an accommodation, we go into the interactive process, meaning we would have a discussion between management and the employee, as we would do with any accommodation, to see if there is an accommodation that meets their needs, that doesn't cause an undue hardship upon the employer. Now, that's a very individualized analysis. That's not a one size fits all for all those employees. So we could get into a situation where the employee decided early on not to take the vaccine, but now let's say we're into April or May and the employee and the general public is now getting the vaccine. The accommodation for that employee may be the employee decides to take the vaccine.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of different scenarios and things that would work for some employees and not work for others. And we have to go through that process under federal law.
And one thing I want to add to that, what I don't want to get into, we want to support all of our staff that needs that support. What I don't want to get into is what a few other large districts that have returned have gotten into, which is they end up having a virtual instructor in their class in-person school and may have some non-certified person just supervising them. That has been shown, I think, to be very ineffective for students. So we want to make sure we don't get down that path, and we have enough to ensure that in-person school is handled effectively.
I guess that, I mean, some of the stuff, of course, there's no way around it, but even with a lot of people getting vaccines, a lot of our employees getting vaccines, obviously kids aren't going to be able to get the vaccine yet, and they can still spread it, obviously, just as much as anybody else, and we don't know who within their family circle is vaccinated or not, and so therefore how likely the kid is to get it. So I'm kind of worried that we're going to lose teachers and staff, but especially teachers, because even if they get vaccinated, they still don't feel very safe, because they still could have a very negative experience with COVID if they get it, even if they do get vaccinated. So I just want us to keep ourselves, I guess, monitoring that closely. Taking the temperature of, not literally, but figuratively taking the temperature of our teachers and seeing how they're feeling about coming back to school with the vaccine. Are we going to lose teachers? How safe are people feeling being in schools even after the vaccine? It's a very, very difficult and a lot of different things to consider. And, part of me wonders, with the timeline, I mean, even on that aggressive timeline that you set out of, around the end of February, where people would be getting the booster, that really only leaves a few months left in the school year. And, even though the parent in me does not want this to happen whatsoever, would it not perhaps be more prudent to think about not having any in-person instruction for the 2020-2021 school year and just setting our sights on the fall? I don't know how I feel about that necessarily at the moment, but it's something that I would like us to at least think about as an option as we get more and more information about it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chris. have not heard from 3 board members, and if you don't have any questions at this point, that's okay, but I'd like to just call your name, and if you say no questions, that's fine, we'll move on. Board Member Craig.
Just a few, Ms. Porter. As we're ranking K through 12, I wonder how we're ranking ECE and ESL students, Dr. Polio. You touched on it very briefly, but I wonder when we find out how many doses will be allotted to JCPS staff, if we can create a priority plan for providing instructions to those student groups, even if their grade might not be able to come back based on how many doses we get.
Without a doubt, our goal is by level at least first. So we've had very detailed discussions about this, would be to bring back all of our high needs ECE students. So for example, if we said we only had enough to bring back pre-K through 3, we would bring back all of the elementary high needs ECE students as well. Now, we would like to do middle and high as well. But one of the things we found is the amount of staff it requires to open up a building when you turn to middle and to high becomes pretty extensive. But we are putting a priority on ECE students in this as well, so that we bring the whole group from that level back, even if we can't bring back the whole school.
Thank you. And I would just urge you, as these numbers become available to you, to think aggressively about how we might be able to offer ECE services throughout the middle and high school. I'm really anxious to find out what the number of doses is going to be. I'm sure you are too. The prospect of not having any instruction for high or middle and high is, it's depressing. I'm sure it is for everybody. And I'm really hopeful that we can get back into the building, even if it were just for a day. That's what my sights are set on.
And I'll just say this as a former high school principal, I know how much April and May mean to high school kids.
Yes.
And so clearly we have a lot of work to do when it comes to, recovery and supporting kids, and that's going to be a long process. But April and May are important, elementary and middle as well, because it's the ceremonial time of the year. And I know how painful that was last year. So I want to make sure we do everything possible to allow kids to experience the celebratory things that happen in April and May, as well as getting back into school.
Thank you. The next question is a tangent of one that Ms. Duncan asked earlier about the color chart. If we don't get enough doses, we're not giving up on the prospects of returning to the classroom at some point if we get into a lower range on that chart, are we?
Absolutely not. If 2 weeks from now we got to the point where we could bring you that recommendation, we would. I'm not confident that's going to happen, but we would do that. And also that's why we're working on, if elementary does come back first, as I said, targeting some groups in middle and high that we could do during that time as well.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that we're not saying to the community tonight it's vaccine or bust for the 2020-21 school year, right?
That's correct.
Thank you. I guess the last question I had was about the funding. I appreciated Cordelia's report, but it sounds like we're still just waiting on information about what the district is going to get, and we can't crunch any numbers until we have more information from the federal government and perhaps KDE. Is that right?
I'll start. Usually, as the last CARES package went through the Kentucky Department of Education, and then they allotted us what that would be. And so we had to wait several weeks before it came down to the districts through the Kentucky Department of Education. Cordelia, any other information you'd like to add to that?
Yes, I have just been notified that the state has received their allocation notice. The original CARES funding, the state received $193 million. On this particular fund that they're receiving now is $928 million. Of that, $835 million is to be allocated to schools. So our portion at this point, we don't know because I haven't gotten any kind of information. And I don't know what makes up that entire 928 million. So it's too premature to tell you how much we will receive.
But there's the prospect of getting 4 to 5 times more than we've received in the last round.
There is that prospect, yes.
And I'm sure we'll be advocating for that at KDE.
Yeah, well, the allocation is based on a formula, and it's based on our Title I allocation. So I think it's kind of cut and dry.
At some point, will the board, once the allocations are made to the district, will the board have any discretion in further allocations, or is it just going to be some, same formula?
No, you will definitely have input on that. So I hope by the 19th we will have specifics. And I will say this, I mean, KDE, and I'll compliment Kevin Brown on this, gave the vast majority of the funding to the districts. And I don't think kept nearly as much as they could have. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Kevin. But there is still obviously opportunities to use funding in various areas that could be state controlled. Is that correct, Kevin?
Yes, that's correct.
Appreciate that. I'm sure at the same time, well, hopefully we'll be receiving some type of a report on the overall or the up-to-date overall impact of COVID on our budget. You gave us the anecdotal information from food services, but I'm sure there's more information to share, perhaps negative information to share with us on the impact on our budget, right?
You will approve the draft budget for 21-22 at our next board meeting, or I hope you will. I'll say that. But we will bring to you a report within that as well about update on COVID and CARES funding, and hopefully have that number for you. So we'll make sure we include that in the 19th presentation.
Thank you. I said that was going to be my last topic. I just forgot one brief one on operations. Transportation, Ms. Duncan also touched on it briefly, but we are anxious to know how, if and when we're able to get back into the classroom, what the bus situation is going to look like. Perhaps some policies or procedures on what we're going to require from bus drivers in the form of temperature checks and mask requirements and supports they'll receive in enforcing those requirements on the bus. Will we receive some kind of a report on that in the future before we put the wheels back on the road?
We would bring that to you before you vote on a return to school plan so that you have that information. I will tell you we'll follow the Safe at School Healthy guidelines provided by the KDE. We'll follow those to a T when we're implementing that transportation, but we'll give you very specifics on it prior to any vote that you would have on returning to school.
And I remember the last report, and I'm sure the board just would probably appreciate some reassurance that we'll be following those closely to ensure safest possible return. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Dr. Polio, when you say that on the 19th, this is just a quick question about approving the budget. How can that be a full approval, or is it tentative based on funding that we will get after that fact? Because to approve something and we don't exactly know what the money is going to look like, how do we make that work?
Cordelia, can you talk a little bit about the process?
Yes, the draft budget is actually, it's a presentation for you to review. You don't have to formally approve it. It is to give you the basics. At this point in time, only the general fund is actually set up in the draft budget. So what we do is take the current year budget that we have, and it's plus and minus what we might know that's going to occur, such as we assume a 4% revenue increase. So that's going to be added to it. We assume that you may approve steps. Regarding the COVID, I mean, we know the CARES funding, the initial CARES funding, and we have so far, what I'm going to be able to present to you is what we have spent or obligated so far on the initial CARES funding. Then by that time, since I have just found out what the state is receiving, I feel like the state would work pretty quickly to be able to notify us of what our allocations are. I already know how it can be used. There are some few restrictions, but not a lot. And so we will be able to present to you, hopefully then, how much that is going to be. Now, as far as a full plan of how those funds will be used, that will not be ready by January 19th by any means, because that's going to take a lot of conversation with you all, as well as the administration and the superintendent, as to what the needs are of our students.
And that,
okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that, because sometimes people hear what we say and they think that that's it, and that's not really it on the 19th. That is a draft with understanding that things can change. And one more quick question on Board Member Craig asked about the ECE and ESL students. Dr. Polio, you spoke to the ECE students. Did you speak to what's going to happen with the ESL students in your response?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That was one of the groups that we are looking for providing additional support as well. So I did not clarify ESL, but it is a group that if this board feels that we are in a spot that we can bring in small groups of students, ESL would be one of those subgroups.
Okay, thank you. Wanted to make sure that Board Member Craig got all of his question answered and not just part of it. So I would now like to call on Board Member McIntosh to see if she has any questions.
I do. As Dr. Polio is probably already used to, I do usually have lots of questions. Going back to some of the funding pieces, if we're not even going to see any of that money, I mean, they can pass bills and they can allocate, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's available to spend for some amount of time. It could be weeks or even months. Is there a timeline put in place in terms of this particular bill? It has to be spent by the end of 2022, 23, as some of the other funding things have been, or the rules, that we have to spend our money first, that we can subsidize, but we can't supplant, and those kind of things. So I'm just kind of thinking ahead too to whatever happens with this year in terms of in person. We already know that next year we're still going to be in need of additional resources and supports for our students. So I'm trying to think how and where that money needs to be spent and when.
The current funding, the current CARES funding has to be spent by September of 2022. And it covers any expenditures that we had back to the middle of March when it was first declared the state of emergency. And there are, like I say, some restrictions, but not like it is with regular Title I funding or other grant funds. This new package is available to spend, again, back to March of 2020 if you have any costs that maybe the original CARES did not cover, but this one goes until September of 2023.
Okay, great, thank you. My operations question is really regarding support staff, specifically custodians. I know that a lot of the individual school plans that I've looked at, there are indications of additional cleaning and sanitizing, high traffic areas, restrooms, things like that throughout the day. Have we adjusted our custodial staffing to make that possible, or added any additional people for that?
So I'll start and then I'll let Chris. We are looking at, when we come back, adjusting the elementary school custodial hours. We clearly heard from some principals that having custodians that work that second 11 to, I don't know when they finish, but well after the kids are there, is instead let's get them in there when the kids are there and making sure that they can clean and support. So we are doing that where we're talking about elementary schools that may only have a couple. Our biggest challenge, Ms. McIntosh, is we struggle right now to fill our custodial vacancies as it is right now. And so it comes down to one of those. It's the same with bus monitors. You all could approve 100 additional bus monitors, but if we can only hire 15 of them, that's essentially our capacity as to what we can add. So we want to support our schools, but making sure obviously that, we can fill those, because a vacant position doesn't help us at all. Chris, would you like to add any to that?
I would just say that we having centralized custodial services now gives us a little more latitude with deploying the resources when and where we need them. And in addition, we've got like a night crew as well that we can send out to fill in some of the gaps for cleaning. But our first priority, obviously, is maintaining a safe and healthy workplace and learning environment for kids and for our employees. So that'll be where we target our services to start with.
Okay. Thank you for that one. Sorry, I'm a list person. With regard to, and this would probably be more with our middle and high schools, but our extracurricular clubs and activities, not necessarily the sports teams. And I know we were going to talk about sports here in just a little bit, but I'm thinking anything from student council, newspaper, all those groups that kind of stay after school to get their work done or have their meetings. I haven't really found anything specific. Are we going to just say, listen, we can't do that right now? Or are we going to make accommodations for those kind of co-curricular and extracurricular clubs to continue or at least start once the schools are back in person?
That will be obviously the board's decision when we talk about that. I think we need to go in line with what we do with athletics. So obviously, if we are allowing athletics to participate at a point, then I do believe we need to allow co-curricular and other extracurricular activities to follow suit, but that will be your call on that. I mean, depending upon where we are as a community, my recommendation would be to allow it as long as they continue to follow social distancing guidelines and our healthy at school guidelines. So we would not want a large gathering of students for an event that might put 1,000 kids in a gym. But if something could happen, like you said, newspaper, where they can still social distance but do their work, then yes, we would want to do that as well. So it will a lot depend on the situation, but that would be my recommendation to you based on looking forward on that so that we can allow kids to do those things.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then my final point is more of just a statement as opposed to a question. Board Member Craig asked a lot of my questions, honestly, with regard to our ECE population. So I would just like to echo that I think the more supports that we can provide students in person, the more effective that they are. I know a lot of our students have missed a lot of their, therapies that they receive in school, whether it's speech therapy and things like that, that are, we have professionals that are working very hard to make those things happen virtually, but some things we know just don't work nearly as well over the computer. So I would just echo the need for small group instruction, whether it's reading remediation or anything we can do to get our high need students in the building, even if it's once a week, I think would be, it would be a priority to me personally.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Schul?
Thank you. I'd have one question. Will there be an opportunity to add on to the number of vaccines ordered by the district? Due to the timing of winter break, some support staff may not have had the technology needed to know and to respond to the survey. Will there be an option for that?
To my knowledge, at this time, the state said they had to have that by December 30th, but we can obviously advocate. I think what we have seen, Dr. Schul, and many, I think you saw it here locally and we've seen it nationally, where there ends up being additional doses of vaccines that are available. So I think what we would probably do, so this is going to have to be very scheduled. So employees are going to get a scheduled time to do this. But I do believe, and I would advocate for giving that opportunity, at least on the back end, for anybody who has changed their mind. In addition to that, we may have some who reserved one who changed their mind as well. So I do think there is some opportunity to do that. I do believe we'll have to follow the state guidance on that. As whatever they tell us on that, we'll have to do that.
Thank you.
Is that all, Dr. Schul? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of questions. On the chart that you showed us, Dr. Polio, it showed the number of employees that had signed up to get the vaccine, but I don't remember seeing the number that of employees that did not complete the survey. Was that on the chart that you showed us?
Hold tight, I'll get that for you. I think it's around, I don't know. I'm sorry.
Around 4,000 did not complete the full survey.
4,000. And I want to say again, Jimmy, correct me if I'm wrong, those are not all full-time employees. Those could be.
That's correct. We surveyed all full and part-time employees, or asked them to complete.
Okay, thank you. One of the charts, one of the slides said that there would be internet service providers. How do we determine as a district where our low-income households are, and how will we make sure that the dollars go to the communities where where the low-income households are to improve the connectivity? Dr. Polio.
I think we will get guidance on that. I don't know for sure if we're going to get clear guidance on this is how you can spend it. This is the first time this was put into the bill. This wasn't necessarily in the bill last time. So we don't know what stipulations are going to be put on that. However, I am advocating and would advocate that we specifically look and cross-reference with the chart that I've showed you all multiple times of the areas of the city that have the most need for internet service and target those specifically. So that would be my desire and hope that we will do that. But I think it'll be based upon what kind of guidance we get and what kind of stipulations are put around the funding. Cordelia, can you add anything to that?
No, I don't know how the providers are going to know any of this. I'm hoping they will work with us to identify those families that need, but at this point, there's not a lot of information regarding this part of the bill at all.
Okay, thank you very much. On the vaccine chart, it showed school personnel K through 12. What happens to our early childhood section for JCPS?
The early childhood?
Yes, sir. Is that considered pre-K, the 515?
Yes, ma'am. That's correct, right? That's correct. So, and that will be the decision we will make once we get the number of doses that you all will approve where we put them in the lineup.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I think I have one more question. I have two more questions. As it pertains to bus drivers, do we have a number that would tell us the potential of bus drivers that could retire when it's time to go back to transporting our students to school? Do we have a plan B in the event that we have large numbers or just numbers, period, of bus drivers that retire? Do we have a plan B?
Well, I don't know if we specifically have a plan B of large number of bus drivers. We would have to add double routes. I know we've got a team working on it pretty extensively. I know that's been a big problem in some districts that have gone, is ensuring that you have enough bus drivers. But I think we could get the numbers who are eligible for any type of retire. It's a little bit more difficult when you're talking bus drivers, as not necessarily employees that might have stayed for 25 years. But I think we could get those numbers. Chris, do you have any input on that?
I can get that for you. I don't know those numbers off the top of my head.
Okay, I just think that's something that we need to consider, that could potentially happen. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but we have to think our thoughts, I think, as we move forward. And who is helping us now as the transportation director, since our transportation director has moved over to another area? How are we managing transportation now, Dr. Polio?
I'm gonna let Chris take that one. Chris?
Donald Robinson is still the acting executive administrator of transportation. He has not started his role as executive administrator of property management, maintenance, and support services yet.
Okay, thank you. I just paid attention to whatever was posted that he was had a new position. That's why I asked. And my last question is an email that I have received since we've been having this meeting. And what are we going to do to ensure our staff that they're going to be safe? Because the email I got said, I understand everything you're doing. How do I know, as a staff member going into a school building, how do I know I will be safe? So that's a question, Dr. Polio, if you can speak to that, because if people don't feel safe, they won't return to their building. So what will we do?
Well, I think we have to ensure that we are following the CDC guidelines. We're following our state health department guidelines when it comes to social distancing, following exactly what they say is necessary, continuing to follow the data that we are provided and having to make adjustments based on that, obviously providing the accommodations for those who need it and the vaccine for those who need it. And I think, what we will see, and definitely by that time, when we're talking about the timeline, we will have seen hundreds of thousands of people vaccinated by that time and its effectiveness. And if this board feels that it is not safe to do that, to implement that, then obviously we'll respect that decision. And we'll take all of those factors into account prior to making any decision about returning to school, and report back on all the social distancing and the safety measures we will take.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask the question since it had been asked of me. It seemed like a good time to put it out there for you to respond to it. So I think that takes care of all the questions from board members for this part of the presentation. So if you're ready to move on to the next section, Dr. Polio, please feel free to do so.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about athletics. We know that this has been a difficult topic throughout the fall, and ensuring that we give kids opportunities to participate, but doing it in a safe manner while we're not in-person school, once again, has been one of the most difficult things we've had to navigate along the way, especially when we moved into red and had to shut down fall sports for multiple weeks because of it. Now, since that time, the guidance from the state has changed. So we do have the opportunity to participate if we are in the red with the latest change from the governor. And so as requested at the last board meeting, we wanted to walk through each of the separate sports and talk about our three options that we can have. What we would like to do is get your guidance tonight as far as the three options, and then obviously take that guidance and make a decision. What is our best way to move forward? So once again, I'll say this, each of the sports that you will see has that type of contact that they are based upon the NFHSA guidelines. I think I got the letters right. And so they are the ones that determine these. And so we wanted to walk through, and the options are very similar on all of them, maybe with the exception of how long they can go, when their postseason is. Once again, I will say this, I would have greatly preferred that the KHSAA we had backed up all of these as requested by the governor and the lieutenant governor, so that we could have winter seasons and spring seasons beginning later in February in relationship to the vaccine, and played both the winter sports championships and the spring sports championships. Unfortunately, that did not happen. Once again, I will acknowledge our two Board of Control members, Jerry Wyman and Marlon Miller, who stood up in that meeting and advocated for that and voted for that. And so we do appreciate their leadership. But only three other Board of Control members felt the same way at that time. So as you know, we did not move forward with athletics. So it is participation around the state right now. We were one of the few districts who is not participating at this point. So I want to make, we need to acknowledge that. And we are having games in Kentucky, maybe playing right now as we speak. So I do want to acknowledge that. First of all, we'll look at basketball, which is considered high contact, obviously, by NFHSA. We have 3 options that we could bring to you. And so, that option number 1 is we could go back right now to segment 3. We've heard from some basketball coaches in all of these sports that kids need at least this segment 3, small group participation. We could allow that during the interim. We could bring back to you a presentation on the 19th of where we are. Unfortunately, I don't know if the problem is, will we get a decrease in the data between now and the 19th? But we could allow some participation in segment 3, and this will be in all the sports, and then bring to you a presentation on January 19th, and then possibly allow practice and games to begin after that time, as soon as maybe a February 1st, which you will see as option 3. So essentially option 1 would be to allow segment 3, but nothing else, and then come back to you January 19th. Option 2 would be to begin practice next Monday. Allow practices to begin next Monday, games to begin February 1st. They would have a 6-week regular season where they could play district games and some others. You would probably see teams get 12 to 15 regular season games in a 6-week period, even more potentially, and then play the postseason. Option 3, which I talked a little bit about, was similar, which would be to allow segment 3 from now until the 16th. We could bring you that presentation on and allow practice to begin the 19th through the 30th, begin games on February 1st, and once again, have a 6-week season. We could go a little bit later than February 1st, but if we're going to have a season and a postseason, and Jerry may clarify this, we're really going to have to start by February 1st with games to get the necessary time in for our teams. Our next sport is wrestling, obviously a high contact sport, and you will see the same 3 options. So I'll just summarize them briefly, which would be to allow segment 3 right now and come back to you with January 19th with an update with no indication whether we're moving forward until we see what the community spread is at that time. Option 2 is the same, which would be to allow it to begin on January 11th, next Monday. Matches would begin February 1st with a 6-week regular season. And then that third option is the same once again, segment 3 from January 6th through the 16th. Allow regular practices the 19th through the 30th. Matches begin February 1st and have a 6-week regular season. So nearly identical to the basketball recommendations. Cheer and dance, you'll see the same thing, although the regular season and postseason is still to be determined by the KHSAA, but it would be the same thing. At January 19th, we could reassess. Option 2 is to begin practice next Monday. Competitions beginning February 1st. Option 3 is segment 3 from January 6th through the 16th, practice 19th through the 30th, and then begin that regular season on February 1st. Swimming and diving is the one low contact sport as identified by the NFSHA. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Pardon me if I mixed it up, but it would be very similar. But there is some slight adjustments to it based on their season. January 19th board meeting. Once again, we could reassess and allow segment 3 in the interim. Option 2 is to begin next Monday, January 11th. Meet begins February 1st with a 9-week regular season. Option 3 would be allow segment 3 from January 6th through the 16th. Begin practice 19th through the 30th. Begin our swim meets on February 1st with a 9-week regular season. So that is a little bit different in that they would have a 9-week regular season. And bowling is the same 3 options, essentially. It is low contact. 19th, reassess, allow segment 3 in the interim. Option 2 is to begin next Monday, games February 1st, with a 5-week regular season. It's a little bit shorter. Option 3 would be segment 3 from now until the 16th. Practice from the 19th through the 30th, begin that 5-week season on February 1st. And so right now we also have, and we have been asked about indoor track and track beginning practice right now. Technically, track is a spring sport season, so we would prefer to address that in the springtime, where they can have a season in the spring. You know, I'm feeling confident based upon the vaccine that we will be able to play some spring sports. So I do believe track could have that ample season during that time. So as I conclude, you see those same three options. We would love to get your feedback on those. Essentially, once again, all three options. One is to continue to have non-participation until the January 19th board meeting. Could allow segment 3 if you choose to do that. That segment 3, once again, is small group instruction where we can still isolate and contact trace. Option 2 is to begin next Monday. Games begin February 1st. Option 3 is to begin segment 3 from January 6th through the 16th, regular practice 19th through the 30th. It is a very difficult decision because these are not outdoors. These are indoors. We know the spread is greater than it was in the fall. You know, I will say this, and hearing many different things from coaches, some want to do it and others don't. I would at least advocate for allowing a segment 3 during this time in small groups so that we can have our kids having interaction with their coaches and getting some instruction to get ready and prepared if we do allow games beginning on February 1st. So that is where we are, but I know it's a difficult decision. And what we would like is input from you before this decision is made. So I'll stop at this point and take feedback and questions.
I'd like to start with Board Member Craig, please.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. I've been especially anxious about this decision for the board. I think because it seems to me that our JCPS student athletes are the only ones in the community who are being asked to sacrifice for the greater good with respect to COVID. Restaurants, bars, other businesses remain open. Catholic and private schools are continuing on with their sports programs. Private clubs are continuing on with the sports programs. So it's been frustrating to me that the board is called upon to ask our JCPS student athletes to make a sacrifice that it seems like nobody else in the community is willing to make for the purpose of limiting community spread. I still agree with everything that we're doing, obviously, with respect to in-person instruction, but I really wanted these student athletes to have an opportunity that cannot be replicated by Zoom or as effectively as our students have been able, our teachers have been able to deliver NTI instruction by Google Classrooms and whatnot. So my strong preference, if we were to rank the options that the superintendent has brought to us tonight, would be to begin with option 2, followed by option 3, and then option 1. I know that there is risk associated with it, but it seems to me to be a different question than coming back to in-person instruction, because our student athletes are opting into the activities. Most of our coaches, from what I've been able to tell, have been advocating for option 2 since this was posted last week. I've received a lot of correspondence asking me to vote for winter sports to proceed. And I have not heard from a single student athlete, coach, constituent. I've heard from nobody asking me to shelve winter sports this year when the rest of the community is able to play. So I'm really, really hoping that we're able to provide some type of a season for our students. Now, with that said, if we do proceed with option 2, as I hope we do, as I spoke with Ms. Dennis, I'm sure you heard Dr. Polio earlier, there are a lot of precautions that we could implement that I'd like to see. For example, if we are able to host basketball games in JCPS this year, I don't see why we need to have any spectators. I'm sure our parents would like to be there to be with their students, but to make it as safe an environment as possible, might recommend that we have no spectators at all, except for coaches, student athletes, and officials. That we use mask and social distance as we are able to during an athletic event. For example, mask on the bench, mask whenever the student athletes are not engaged in actual competition, and to be as aggressive as we can with those other options to ensure that our JCPS students, and frankly, the poorest students and probably a higher percentage of Black and brown student athletes in the community are not asked to make sacrifices that nobody else in the community seems to be willing to make. So that's my piece, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next board member that wants to add something, how about Board Member Marshall?
Thank you, Chair Porter. I will second many of the comments made by Board Member Craig. I do think that from what I'm hearing as well, option 2 is what a lot of our coaches and student athletes are asking for. I think it is a tough decision. And I think the decisions that we've made going forward with fall sports were around a lot of those recommendations for safety. And so I will commend our athletic directors and coaches of our fall sports for what I witnessed firsthand and being able to see them follow the guidelines, keep their student athletes safe. And I believe also, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Polio, but from our fall sports, we didn't see a spread amongst the teams. Am I correct?
You are correct. I mean, I can't say we didn't see some.
Yeah, there was some,
positive cases. So I think we have to define, and it's obviously very difficult to know where the spread occurred. I don't think we saw it to the degree that we may have expected at the very beginning. But we did have, as you know, you've seen the list of cases. So we did have some, but it definitely wasn't to the extent that we thought may have occurred.
Yeah. And so, I think that, putting confidence in our ADs and our administrators and our student athletes, I think goes a long way. So I'll agree with, option 2 being the recommendation. But I would also suggest, as we did with fall sports, that we have a clearly laid out plan for how we're going to proceed with those athletic events as we did for fall sports. So that's really all the comments that I have.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Chris?
Yes, thank you. I'm not entirely sure why, if our preference going into the KHSAA meeting was strongly to push things back, I'm not entirely sure why we would go with what KHSAA says, even if we strongly disagree with it. I realize that means our students may not have the chance to participate in sports that other students throughout the state do. But, just because another entity makes a bad decision doesn't mean that we should make the same decision. When we had this discussion about fall sports, this was, and I think I can share my screen here, so I'm going to try to do it real quick. This was, well, maybe I can't do it. But anyway, I was going to show maps from the week, Corona maps in Louisville from the week of our fall sports decision versus the week from right now, what our winter sports decision. And when we made the fall sports decision, the incidence was much, much lower, so the map is yellow and orange. Now the map is all red or dark red. Then we were talking about outdoor sports. Now we're talking about indoor sports. So, multiple factors have gotten much worse between the time we made the fall sports decision and the time that we are making the winter sports decision. I think we have to come to terms with the fact that no matter what kind of caveats or warnings we may put on this decision, if we do decide to allow some sports, it's very difficult for people not to interpret that as the JCPS board saying that we think it's safe for people to participate in these activities as whether as athletes or as coaches. Of course, that's not safe, and nothing right now is safe. But if we allow this to go ahead, I mean, we're essentially saying, we think it's safe for you to do this. Now, of course, that people always have free will as to whether or not they want to participate in that, but they're going to be under, even if nobody puts pressure on them directly, I mean, they're going to feel a tremendous amount of pressure if they feel like all their friends are participating in the sport. Athletes are going to feel a tremendous amount of pressure to participate as well, even if they've got maybe somebody caring for them at home that is at greater risk of COVID. Likewise, coaches, who sometimes are 40, 50, 60, 70 years old, are going to feel a tremendous amount of pressure to coach their kids, even though they may be at greater risk. So I'm against allowing anything for the time being. I'd like to revisit the discussion, every board meeting that we have, and see how things have progressed. But for now and for the foreseeable future, I won't be in favor of allowing anything to happen with winter sports, except perhaps the small pod conditioning that or practices, whatever we're calling it, that Dr. Polio mentioned. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Ms. Duncan?
Oh, well, I completely agree with everything Dr. Cobb has said. The difficulty here, I've received some concerns from coaches who have expressed things that I don't know how we reconcile. Right now, we don't know when our students are infected. Sometimes we don't know, and that infection rate spreads. And one of the biggest concerns that has struck me the hardest is our lack of medical support for kids who are post-COVID. Like, we send them back on the court, or we send them back on the field, or we send them right back out there to play. The doctor has done a preliminary kind of screen, but we don't know what COVID has done to those athletes and to the hearts and lungs and other parts of them. And, it terrifies me, the thought of sending our athletes who are not really going to have time to do a lot of conditioning for games, right back out onto the courts and say, oh, well, he's over it now and it's okay, or she's over it and it's okay. That scares me to death. When people start trying to compare us to other districts, it's kind of irritating to me, because obviously we are in no way like other districts anywhere in this country. We have, right now in particular, we have areas of our community that have the highest infection rates in the state. It's not just one area, we have several areas that are the highest infection rates in the state. And combine that with a student assignment plan that sends our student athletes all over the county, it just kind of sets us up for the perfect spread if that happens. So I'm very hesitant about this. I would love to delay. I'm very cautious. The best I could do would be option one, where we do like we did in the fall with pods, and give us a chance to assess again on the 19th what our community looks like, because this is about this community infection rate that we have to watch. And we can't risk our kids being exposed out there when the community rate, if it continues to rise the way it has done. Now, if it's falling, I'm thrilled to death. And then we can look at that point. But I'm very cautious. First option, and assess on January 19th. That's me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Shule, and then Board Member McIntosh. Dr. Shule?
Thank you. I just ditto the comments that have been made by Board Member Duncan and Board Member Cole. Option one, I think, is the only thing that I, in good integrity, could approve of and could vote in favor of. I think we must demonstrate taking precaution and demonstrate that for our students and for this community. And we are in dire times. And I think that we need to do all that we can to protect our students and our staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member McIntosh.
Okay. I realize as the new person here that I'm playing a little bit of catch up, but I was very intentional about following all the meetings from last spring up until now. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the biggest concerns with fall sports sometimes was the size of the teams, right? Football, you've got 50, 60, 80 kids on a team. And so when we're talking about small groups for football, it's outside, of course, which is different, but a small group for football might be 10 to 20 kids. And that is oftentimes the size of the entire basketball team in most schools. So I think we're talking about teams that are just their entire population of that team is smaller. So I'm trying to wrap my mind around that part of it. Has there been any consideration of moving some of our coaches? I don't want to say letting them cut in line, but have we talked about maybe letting them get vaccinated a little bit earlier than they otherwise may? Because of course, most of them are middle and high school teachers as well when they coach those sports.
We have not dug into that specifically, but I think we could take a look at what that number would be to do that. So I don't think we've had detailed discussions about having them move forward in the line.
Okay. Thank you. And then to kind of piggyback off of Board Member Craig's comments about limiting the size of the spectators, I would have to go back and maybe advocate that we include our dance and cheer teams in that number of being permitted to be at the games for performances. A lot of these teams have lost their entire season because they're getting overlooked and considered non-essential by a lot of folks. And I realize that they are non-scholarship activities. Some people don't consider them sports. Those people, I think, would be wrong. And I also would advocate that we understand that for most of those participants, it is a year-round sport. We can call them spring, we can call them winter, but in a typical calendar year, participants on the dance teams and especially varsity cheer teams are usually practicing all but maybe 6 to 8 weeks out of the year. And to not give them any opportunity for any kind of season because so many of their competitions have been canceled and performances were eliminated from a lot of the football games, I think would just really be unfortunate. So I have to, Coach Wyman to me. Coach Wyman knows that I'm going to advocate for my dance and my cheer folks because I think that we have to recognize that they're just as important as all the other sports.
And can I just jump in real quick? And I think I know this, and Jerry, if you want to clarify, if we limit fans, as was discussed earlier, we will always have cheer and dance. They are considered participants in the game. And we could even do, pep band for that matter as well. So do you agree with that, Jerry?
Yes, I do. The number that the Kentucky High School Athletic Association has thrown around is 15%. And the 15% is looked at a little differently for the winter than it was for the fall. It's 15% of everybody that's in the gym. So it counts cheer, dance, officials, coaches, players. It counts everybody that's in the arena. So that would be a little bit, a few less fans would be allowed in there than would be under a normal 15%. So, but no, as Ms. McIntosh said, I'd get in big trouble at home if I said cheer and dance weren't sports myself. So I absolutely agree with her.
Thank you. And then I have one more, I guess just more of a comment than anything. If we're really and truly, as a board and as a community committed to equity, we have to remember that poor kids can't afford to play club sports. I mean, these travel teams, families are spending hundreds and thousands of dollars. My family's been a part of that. And they aren't able to play the club sports, and they're not able to do the travel teams. And so their school, their public school, is their one and only opportunity for this type of education. And I do believe in the education that students receive through playing sports. So I would just like to remind people, and maybe have that as part of our discussion that we are talking about some of our most vulnerable students yet again being asked to sacrifice something that many of their peers are not being asked to sacrifice.
Thank you.
Okay, I think everybody has been heard of, has been able to express their opinion. I don't have an option 1, 2, or 3. I do have concerns that cannot be answered at this point about the equity of sports and getting students to the practices and getting the facilities cleaned and making sure that everything is clean for everyone, whether we have our participants in the auditorium or not. What is the process looking like as it pertains to swimming? What does that look like as it pertains to the safety of the facility? A lot of questions like that. So I don't have a specific answer or specific recommendation. But as we talk about doing sports, the concern always is how do we get the students to where they do the sports? Because if we're not transporting students, then how do they get there? Do we assume that they get there on the bus? Do we provide transportation for them? There are some unanswered questions, and I don't want to go into great detail tonight, but if we're going to make it available, then it needs to be equitable for students to get there, regardless as to where they live. And that should not be a determinant to keep students away from the opportunity to participate. Those are just my thoughts. So I don't think, according to what I have in my notes, that we are to vote on this. So Kevin Brown, can you tell me, all I have is that we're supposed to, a motion to receive the update on the district responses. Is that exactly what we're doing at this point?
Yes, you can call for a vote on this if that's the will of the board, since this is a regular meeting. But I think the intent was to give guidance to the superintendent on how to proceed over the next few weeks.
Can we call? I'm sorry, Chair Porter, may I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Can the board call for a vote on the options tonight, Kevin, by a board member making a motion?
Yes.
I would move that the district proceed with option number 2 as presented by the superintendent.
Okay, so there's a motion to proceed with option 2. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Go ahead. McIntosh can have it.
Okay, McIntosh. All right. So at this point, we need to take a vote on option 2. We have a motion and a second. Before I ask for the vote, I think we've had all the discussion that we need to have, but is there a question that needs to be asked before I call for the vote, please?
Is this for all sports, option 2?
I was not asked
this for all sports?
But I understand the motion to be on all the sports presented in the presentation tonight. Is that right, Mr. Brown?
Yeah, you could, that could be your motion, yes, if you want to clarify that.
And also clarify.
That take care of your question, Dr. Chris?
Yes. Yeah, bowling. So we're talking bowling, swimming, diving, cheer, dance, wrestling, basketball. Okay, that's it.
Correct.
Okay, so we have a motion by Board Member Craig. We have a second by Board Member McIntosh. And we have a question answered as to the sports that would be included in that. So at this time, I will call for the vote for this, starting with Board Member McIntosh.
And I'm voting in the affirmative. I say yes if I want. Okay, I just want to be clear. Yes.
You say yes. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Schul?
No.
Okay. Ms. Duncan?
No.
Okay. Board Member Marshall?
Yes.
Okay. Board Member Craig?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Dr. Chris?
No.
Diane Porter votes no. So we have 1, 2, 3 yeses, I think, and 1, 2, 4 noes. So the motion does not pass. Is that correct, Kevin? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, the motion does not pass. Okay, thank you. So now we've had a motion and that motion did not pass. What we are being asked to do by the superintendent tonight is to receive the update on the district response to COVID-19 pandemic. So is there a motion to receive the update on the district response on COVID-19?
May I ask a question, Ms. Porter, before we move to the motion?
Yes, sir.
Does the result of the vote, Chair Porter or Mr. Brown or Dr. Polio, now mean we'll receive another recommendation at the next board meeting per option 1?
If the board, the intent of the report was to give the superintendent direction, and the superintendent generally makes a decision on Thursdays in consultation with staff on athletics. However, the board obviously has the authority to, since it's a regular meeting, interject a motion on the matter, which the board did. So the status quo, I assume, will remain and come back to the board. I don't want to speak for you, Dr. Polio, on the 19th with a further update on where we are.
I would add this from your guidance tonight and your vote that we would, now that we are allowed to do that, if you give me the authority to allow segment 3 only over the next 2 weeks until we bring back a vote at the January 19th board meeting.
Ms. Porter, may I ask a question related to that specifically?
Yes, sir.
Sorry to belabor the point, but could you say, and forgive me if you said it already, but what specifically does segment 3 mean?
Jerry, could you lay that out, please?
Sure. Segment 3 requires, masks of all the coaches, obviously. The kids are in pods. They stay in the same pods daily. They do a health screening when they get there, which they would do in any situation. It gives us a little bit better opportunity to mitigate any risks, as well as to keep up with contact tracing. So it's what we've allowed before. I think that our kids need our coaches right now. So I think that would be now that the vote's been taken, I think that would be a compromise that would help our kids.
And it's no competition as far as like scrimmage or anything.
No, they can't go person to person. They can't do 3-on-3 drills. They couldn't wrestle each other. They could condition. They could do ball drills in basketball. They could do some. They couldn't build pyramids in cheerleading or get close together in the sports, but they could at least get conditioning in and start working on individual drills. They could do tumbling, but they couldn't do, any pyramids or anything like that for cheer.
That answer your question, Dr. Chris? Okay. So my question, Kevin Brown, is do we have to say option one, or is that just implied?
Well, when the board obviously exits the meeting and adjourns the meeting, Dr. Polio retains authority under board policy and state law on day-to-day operations, on canceling and having events or not having events during an emergency. So he would have that decision. I think he is asking, though, for if there is a consensus today on option 3, that obviously if the board wants to reaffirm that, then the board can also do that by vote.
I think I'm saying option 1 though right now.
I'm sorry, option 1, segment 3, option 1, which allows the segment 3 practice.
So do we go by consensus, or do we have to have a vote? That's my question.
Could I suggest that we, just for clarity purposes, that we have a vote so Dr. Polio is clear about what we want?
That would be good.
Right. If there's any thought that there may be some confusion or want to clear that up, then obviously a motion and a vote is the way to go.
So, Ms. Porter, if you'll allow me, I'll go ahead and make a motion that we allow segment 3 until our next board meeting, and we reevaluate at that time.
Okay, I want to make sure I have the numbers right. Is it 3 or 1? Because there's nothing.
Option 1.
1. Okay, just want to make sure. So there's a motion. Is there a second to the motion?
I second that.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. And I don't think at this point we need any discussion or additional questions. Does anybody have a question or discussion before I call for the vote, please? Hearing none, I'll start with the vote, starting with Board Member McIntosh.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Ms. Duncan.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Craig.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Dr. Chris.
Yes.
Thank you. Diane Porter. Yes. So it's unanimous on that part of it. So that takes care of that particular part. Do we still need the motion to receive the response? Because we talked about something other than sports. We talked on the first part, we talked about COVID, period. So is there a motion to receive the update on the district response to the COVID-19 pandemic, please?
Correct.
Is there a motion? Board Member Craig, seconded by?
I second.
Ms. Duncan, thank you. I will quickly call for the vote. I'm sorry this might be taking longer than you thought. Board Member McIntosh.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Craig.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Dr. Chris.
Yes.
Thank you. Diane Porter. Yes. So that's unanimous. So now we will move on to the consent calendar. There are 3 items that have been pulled down from the consent calendar, and those items are item 7C, which is the recommendation for approval of job descriptions. Item 7H6F, approval of MOA for mental health services with 7 counties. And item 7HCG, recommendation for approval for mental health services with Euspiritus. So at this time, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar minus the 3 items that I just mentioned? Is there a motion, please?
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Schul. Seconded by?
Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. I will call for the vote quickly. Ms. McIntosh.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Craig?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Dr. Chris?
Yes.
Thank you. Diane Porter? Yes. So we're unanimous on that part of it. And I think that, Kevin, I would like to know if we have to do these in the order number-wise, because I think there's going to be more discussion on the item 7C about the job descriptions. Can we go on and take care of the other two, since I think that one of our board members has to abstain on those. So
Right. You can take them out of order.
okay, I can take them out of order. Okay, great. Let's see, where do we go first? Let's go with the item 7HC, which is the mental health services with Euspiritus. So is there a motion to approve that particular consent item?
Marshall?
Okay, thank you. Board Member Marshall, seconded by?
Shoal.
Okay, thank you. And I'll call for the vote. Board Member McIntosh.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Craig.
And I can offer further explanation if warranted, but I am abstaining on this and the Euspiritus contract. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to offer more explanation, or you just want to do that?
Just like Mr. Brady with Norton, I have a conflict of interest in the family with a family member administering the contract. So I'm abstaining out of an abundance of caution.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Chris?
Yes.
Diane Porter, yes. So the motion passes, 6 yeses, and Board Member Craig abstained. The next item I would like for us to consider is the approval of the MOA for mental health services with 7 counties. Is there a motion to approve that consent item, please?
Marshall?
Board Member Marshall, seconded by?
McIntosh.
Okay, thank you. Board Member McIntosh. Calling for the vote. Board Member McIntosh.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Schul.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Craig.
Abstention for the same reasons. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Chris.
Yes.
Thank you. Diane Porter, yes. Okay, so the motion passes with 6 yeses and 1 abstain. So now we will move on to the recommendation for approval of job descriptions. I have to have a motion and a second before we can ask for discussion. So is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? That particular item, the approval of the job description, I'm sorry. Is there a motion?
McIntosh.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Called seconds.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Chris? Okay, before I call for the vote, is there discussion on the item, this particular item for the job description? Who would like to start with the discussion, please?
Well, I'll start.
Okay. Ms. Duncan?
Yes. I understand the thinking, trying to make directors all, look the same. But I don't know whether director is even the right name for the title of the person who's in charge of athletics and academics or activities across the district. This job is huge, and I don't know whether that's really the right title for it. To expect somebody to come in and assume this responsibility, which you're just selling your life for this salary, and then you're going to sell your life for reducing what the salary is right now. It seems, it's very hard for me to say this makes sense to me. I just, some jobs are just different than other jobs, and I think trying to squish this one into director and not factor in all of the responsibilities over all of our schools this way, it just doesn't feel right to me. So I don't know. I mean, maybe you can help me understand. It feels like we're lowering our expectations maybe for whoever can be in charge of this, and reducing the salary and for a job that requires a tremendous skill. And I love the administrative background, the supervision background here, because it involves so much of that. So anyway, I'm just having trouble with this.
Okay, and what I'm going to do, Ms. Duncan, is listen to your comment and then other comments, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Polio and Mr. Adams to make a response, as opposed to just going back and forth, if that's okay. So
Sure.
Are there other comments or questions about this particular item as it pertains to the this particular job description? Dr. Schul?
Thank you. I'm concerned about the removal of the certifications and the criterion that was previously required for this position. I don't understand why we would reduce the criteria that we would want the occupant of the job to come with. So I'm really concerned about that. I'm also concerned about the elimination of the background and supervision, and I'm wondering how will that impact the person who fills this role, their ability to, without having the relationships built in with these principals, how will they be able to do their job as successfully as someone with the supervision background will be able to do that?
Okay, thank you. Other comments? Board Member Marshall?
Thank you, Chair. But the same concerns were raised with someone in regards to a lot of these changes. So I think it's just the question is just getting some clarification on why these changes were made. I know there's a statement that's on the board agenda, but would like a little bit more elaboration on exactly why these changes are taking place.
Okay, I think at this point I'll turn it over to Dr. Polio and he can respond, and Mr. Adams also, if he would like to respond. So Dr. Polio.
I'd be happy to take it. And once again, this is the board decision on this, and we continue to kind of go down this path every time we have a director job open, which when we did the reorganization was essentially to all directors would be at that that specific 12 level. We were working to eliminate the 13 level, and it would be 12, and we would have similar criteria to be in the position. And what we have to tackle every time we do this is what job is more important. And so on the same exact same job list, there's the director of ESL that is a lower grade. And so are we saying that the director of ESL is not as important? And so we have to get out, and if this is the way the board wants to go, that's fine. We have to get out of the business of weighing each individual job that comes up and deciding which is the most important. We don't do that with principal. We don't do that with AP. We don't do it with counselor. We only do that with central office, where we're making these decisions about what the grade of the pay should be, where this will still be in well over $100,000 a year. So I do want to acknowledge that. So, we can do the 12. We can put back in the certification. That's fine with me. Most of our 12s don't necessarily always have to have that certification, but we are trying to standardize how we do this. So each and every board meeting, we are not tackling which job is important, which job has more work to do than the other job. And so that's what we are just trying to do, is standardize it. Just like we know that we don't differentiate pay from a principal when one school has 600 kids and another has 2,200 kids. They both get the same grade if your high school principal has 600 or 2,200. Even though we know many times that varying jobs may be more challenging or difficult. So just trying to standardize it. And the second thing I will say, if this is not the one, that's fine. We are going to have to make some tough calls when it comes to budget and personnel. And it's, as we all know, this is very difficult when we try to do this because people get upset about cutting pay, even though there won't be someone in this position. But that is coming on the horizon here, is us having to make very difficult decisions about this budget because we are $25 million in the red right now, as we've talked about many times. So, you know, I'm hoping that we can get to a point where we standardize these decisions and say all directors are this, period. And if we need to add more responsibilities onto others, then we do that. But I'm open to the direction of the board on this and have no problem either way. I just know that we've got to standardize this process.
Dr. Fuller, if I may also, one of the things that you all asked about is the reduction of the minimum requirements. By placing this position just under that of a school principal, we really felt like that we ought to look at the possibility of this, are you going to be required to have a school principal certification? And so we pulled that away, but what it also does for us is open this up to somebody who may be able to come in from the outside with a sports management type of degree, as opposed to just a school certification. Those who have school certification would still be considered a related field, and so anyone who has applied for the position with that certification or education degree would still be able to be considered for it. This does open up the possibilities for other people to come in, though, too.
Other questions or comments? Board member, Dr. Chris?
I think it's good that we still have under the desirable qualifications the master's degree. So, I mean, I assume that would mean in the hiring process that, you know, if we had a candidate that had those qualifications, that they would, of course, be more desirable than somebody that didn't. So that bar, even though it's not as firm a bar as it was with the minimum qualification, is still there, I think. I know it's difficult. Well, first, I agree with Dr. Polio's point about how we have to get to standardizing these. You know, I think it, minus some objective standardization, you know, I think we would be creating an environment that is rife for doing the things that Dr. Polio was just talking about, where people are constantly comparing and contrasting. Oh, you know, your position, they think your position's more important, but I'm doing more work. You know, there needs to be some objective criteria, even if it's not a perfect criteria, so that we don't get into that sort of thing. And I know it's difficult because, you know, it is technically a black and white issue. You know, either the board has authority over it or it doesn't. But you know, in this particular case, like a lot of other things, frankly, that are on the consent agenda usually, you know, I've always seen it as something that, yes, it's under the board's authority, but unless there is some really significant reason to question Dr. Polio's judgment on these sorts of things, you know, I think that, you know, my preference would be for the board to defer to Dr. Polio, unless we had some, you know, unless there was some extremely, you know, egregious issue or serious reservation that was brought up by it. I just think you have to give the person, you know, who we've put in charge of managing this structure, you have to give them freedom to align it as efficiently and fairly as they think they need to. So, I would prefer that we not, you know, kind of frequently parse these sorts of job descriptions. Personally, I know it's up to each individual board member to make that determination, but I have no problem okaying this one.
The comments. Did I hear you say, Mr. Adams, that this position will be either classified or certified? Because has it been changed from classified to? Has it been changed from certified to classified? Is there an option for this?
Certification is not required, so it would not necessarily be a certified position in that case. If certification is required, then it would be a certified position. But the pay scale would, while it would fall into a job family 2, grade 12, I believe, it would still be it would be classified or listed as a classified position. But someone with certification could still hold that position. Both of those are still paid into the same retirement system.
Okay, so if a person who is certified applies, it would still be, they would still get that job it would still be called a classified position, correct?
Correct. And it's very similar to my situation. I have certifications, 3 different certifications, but I am in a classified positions, but I continue to be able to pay into KTRS based on the level of the position.
Okay, and a classified position receives their retirement from a different division, is that correct?
I'm not sure what that question is. I mean, they would still remain into KTRS because it requires a bachelor's degree.
Not
okay,
a division.
Okay, I'm not clear on that, but okay.
So all employees in school districts that have a job description that requires a bachelor degree or higher are required by law to be in KTRS, and then other retirement systems serve other classifications of employees.
This is in line with what we bring you. Unless they are supervising school principals, we bring them to you as classified administrators.
Okay, I think that what I have heard tonight is that the board needs a work session, Dr. Polio, on understanding the whole process of how we are working with job descriptions and how things are. I understand the deficit in the budget, but I don't think that this particular board or a board, there has been a work session on personnel, job descriptions, how things are rated, and those kinds of things. So maybe that needs to be information that is shared with the board. I think when a position changes from one level to another level, there's a concern. Does that, and I think Dr. Chris said it correctly, does that mean that that's less work or less authority? I just think that there's some uneasiness about the work that we have to do. I'm not saying that we don't have to do it, but I think that we should be better prepared to make these decisions. Maybe that would eliminate some of the questions. I'm not exactly sure, but.
And I'm happy to pull this from now and bring back to you on the 19th after further discussion on it. And I'm happy to have some type of work session. I know work sessions are just like information sessions here because, it's the same format, but I'm happy to do that as well. I'll reiterate once again that as a district, we have to get to the point where we standardize, just like in schools. The schools, there is never any input as to what grade any position is. It's locked in stone. And so I know in central office, it's very different. But we have this discussion each and every time we bring something. But I'm happy to pull it, Chair Porter, and then bring it back on the 19th.
Well, right now we have a motion and a second, so I don't think that we can absolutely, I don't know, Board Member Craig has a comment. Mr. Craig?
I wanted to jump in earlier, and I don't know that I'm adding much here. I just wanted to push back a little bit. I appreciate the goal of standardization. I appreciate Chair Porter's comments to make sure that the entire board, including our newest board member, is on the same page with respect to how we're standardizing everything. I have bragged on the administration to many in the community that we are looking to slash central office salaries at every board meeting, and I continue to agree that we should do that. But I also want to push back and protect the board's prerogative with respect to job descriptions. It's one of the most important things that the board does, and I don't want to find ourselves in a position where we completely abdicate that responsibility.
So at this point, we have a motion and we have a second. So I have to call for.
Can I ask if I can withdraw it? Is there any way, Kevin, that we can do that?
Well, we'll need to deal with the motion that's on the floor.
Okay.
Unless,
The person that made the motion could withdraw it.
correct.
I don't remember who that was.
I think Board Member McIntosh made the motion, and then Dr. Chris did the seconding. Am I correct about that? Does that sound right? What I have in my notes?
Yeah, I seconded it. That sounds right.
Kevin, you saying they can withdraw that?
The person making the motion can withdraw the motion if she is so inclined.
That's a decision for Board Member McIntosh.
Feeling a little pressure right now, guys.
I'm just saying I respectfully ask you to withdraw it.
Okay, yes. Okay, then I withdraw. And then we can come back.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, then there is no vote that's needed, correct? Kevin Brown, so it will come back to us at the January 19th meeting. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure I'm doing everything correctly. Thank you, everyone, for the discussion and everything that we have done tonight.
Ms. McIntosh has one more thing, I think.
Just a very quick question. By doing this, are we going to significantly delay being able to fill that position?
No, most likely either way, we would put a retired person in there, the interim. I will use this time to recognize Jerry Wyman for his fantastic career in JCPS and what he's done. But either way, we'll have to put a retired administrator in that position temporarily until we fill it. So we should be able to move forward, even as much as we'll miss Jerry Wyman.
Okay. What is the date of the retirement for Mr. Wyman? What is his retirement date, Dr. Polio?
It's February 1st.
Okay, thank you. Does that take care of everybody's questions at this point?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Board Member McIntosh, welcome to JCPS Board of Education. This has been quite a meeting, so I hope that means we'll see you on January the 19th. We'd certainly like to have you come back. But this is the work of the Jefferson County Board of Education. So thank you so much for your patience this evening. Are there any other comments before I call for the adjournment this evening? Any other comments from anyone? Dr. Schul.
I just have a brief shout out. Today I got a chance to be a part of Backpack Defenses at Indian Trail. And the teachers and under Dr. Wood's leadership have done a tremendous job at coaching those students to do their backpack defenses virtually. And so I wanted to give a kudos to Mr. Wood and to all of the wonderful teachers and staff at Indian Trail and the students. They were phenomenal.
Awesome.
Okay, thank you so much. I do want to remind everybody to please come back on January the 19th, please. Happy New Year. Happy first board meeting. Is there a motion at this hour of 8:48 p.m.? Is there a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Board Member Craig, seconded
Marshall
by
seconds.
Board Member Marshall. That was quick. I'll call for a quick vote, please. Board Member McIntosh.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Dr. Schul.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Marshall.
Yes.
Thank you. Board Member Craig.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Dr. Chris.
Yes.
Thank you. And I am Porter. Yes. Once again, Board Member McIntosh, welcome to the Jefferson County Board of Education. To all the board members, thank you for the hard work that you do. I will say that this is your month to be recognized. So thank you, and thank you again for your work. We are officially adjourned. Thank you.
All right. Good night.